Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Nigel Polak. I am the current president as of today's date, which is the 30th of November 2023, of the Psychotherapy and Counselling Federation of Australia. And today I am with the immediate past president of PACFA, Dr Di Stow, and we're going to talk about her reign as PACFA president and as a way of capturing the history of PACFA. So I hope you enjoy learning about the history of psychotherapy and counselling through our federation in Australia. So welcome, Di. Great to have you.
It's really good to see you today.
So I'd like to begin perhaps by getting you to give us a brief introduction to yourself, and perhaps telling us a little bit about just in summary form, when you were with PACFA and when you were president of PACFA, and then we'll tell a bit of a bigger story about your time before PACFA and then with PACFA.
For sure. It's really exciting to be here talking about this and reflecting on my PACFA history. I'm currently working in private practice in Hobart. I've got rooms in North Hobart, and I work with people with grief and loss and trauma. And I've been doing that for a couple of decades, and I love my work. PACFA really added enormous value to my work in counselling, and I first got interested in PACFA in the early 2000s. So I've been a PACFA person since way back then, when it was Professional Counselling Association of Tasmania. I got a call from a couple of colleagues who were interested in forming a group that subsequently became a more robust version of the state-based Professional Counselling of Tasmania. And I started learning about PACFA way back in the early 2000s. Long time ago, Nigel. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start there. Tell us about that journey, and tell us about what it was like to be a part of the emerging counselling and psychotherapy profession as it's professionally constituted through PACFA in Australia at that time.
Well, in the early 2000s, PACFA was made up of member associations. So they were state-based groups of counsellors and psychotherapists, but also therapy groups like Gestalt groups or somatic groups, a bunch of groups, maybe even 30 or 40. And we also had not just counselling psychotherapy, but psychoanalytic groups around then in the early 2000s. And in Tasmania, it was a small, dynamic little group that got moving. Essentially, people, I think, that had done Masters of Counselling through the University of Tasmania. So there was that kind of interest base, I guess. When I joined the committee, and I remember that I was interested and helpful in doing professional development activities for the Tasmanian group, organising those, and on behalf of the group itself, and inviting, or members would come along. And we had a great time. We actually got hooked up with the yacht club in Sandy Bay, which is still the home of PACFA Tas today. So it's kind of nice to think that PACFA Tas has been, or PACFA's been involved with that venue for like 2 decades. People familiar with that venue as a place to go for PACFA. That's actually been a very positive thing. And we linked nationally, and after maybe a few years, I was invited to go as a PACFA council rep to a meeting in Melbourne. And I'm smiling because I was invited to go. I think I'd gone off, whatever was the organising group, the executive of Professional Counselling of Tasmania, and to lure me back, people said, "Oh, if you go as this PACFA delegate, we'll pay for you to go, and they're also having a conference and we'll sponsor you to go to that as well, if you then come back and tell us about it and join back on the executive and stay with us. And that's actually what happened. I was really proud to go as a PACFA delegate from Professional Counselling Tasmania. And I was a bit overwhelmed. I'm just remembering that first time. People seemed to be older and wiser than me and knew more stuff about PACFA. And at the same time, people were very welcoming. And my early memory is big discussions about the difference between counselling and psychotherapy. Those were major topics, and where psychoanalytics fitted into that. And there were like robust arguments about this thing and that thing. And I was like a newbie, kind of noticing people's passion for the profession. So this is like in the first decade of the 2000s, I suppose. And I became passionate myself in the sense of the greater good, something about the greater good of counselling, the counselling psychotherapy profession. And I was very keen to contribute to Tasmania. So I stayed on the Tasmanian group for years, and I was the president for several years, ultimately, of Professional Counselling Association of Tasmania. That feels like a clumsy title. In fact, I might have renamed it in the telling of this story, but that was way before the PACFA restructure.
So historic, and look, sounds like some things haven't changed.
No.
We still have robust arguments about the differences between psychotherapy and counselling, and we hope that we'll resolve those differences one day for the benefit of our own profession and for the general public. And I think part of that, what's important, and partly what's important about that story that you're telling, is that in Australia, the profession was made up of state-based associations and modality-based associations, and was very disparate. And while each of those bodies did their best to run registration programs and have members and hold a register, they were all very disparate, and they all found it very difficult to be taken seriously, which was we know the original impetus for the creation of PACFA as a federation of pre-existing associations.
Well, even as you say that, Nigel, I'm acutely aware of the enormous amount of work that each of those associations did on behalf of members and on behalf of the greater organisation. Membership records, minutes of meetings, the formalities of a very small group, but needing to have president, vice president, secretary, and the difficulty in actually finding volunteers, even in the early 2000s, when it was actually easier to get volunteers than it is these days in some respects. People really took it on board and worked hard for the associations and ultimately for PACFA. Very positive.
And you talked about some of the people who had already been there, when you joined PACFA Tas. Well, it was PACFA Tas at that time. Who were they? Do you remember some of those personalities? Do you remember the characters that were around, the people that were doing that work? We could put some names to the
in terms of
who was there?
Well, nationally,
or even in Tasmania before we even get to the national level.
Yeah. So colleagues like Hans Kelder. Hans, I don't think, is a member of PACFA anymore, but he was a member for a good long time. And Berry Dunstan did a great job for the local chapter, particularly in a secretarial type role for years. She was our sort of bookkeeper, gatekeeper, record keeper, astonishing amount of contribution. And in more recent years, some of those names still stay on, like Fiona Bailey, who's very involved still to this day. Fiona's been there for a lot of years as well. Yeah.
And you talked about the venue where you first started with the Tasmanian branch, and still to this day you're using the same venue. Do you know what the history is of the relationship with the venue and what it is about the relationship with the venue that's made it so sustainable?
Yeah, well, I'm the conduit for the venue because I've been involved with that particular yacht club since the 80s, I reckon. And because of my involvement, we were able to have special deals on room rates and catering and things like that. And because I knew a lot of people down there, and Ismay over years developed and my relational style, people were interested to host us or to have us part and parcel of the ongoing nature of the bookings of the yacht club. And also it's a reasonably central location in Hobart, and it's got a kind of a nice vibe. It's fresh and clean and welcoming, and they're always ready for us, so we've never had to sort of really put chairs and tables out. It's been kind of nicely presented when we've walked in the door, which kind of is a very welcoming thing, and that we've obviously passed that on to members and people over years as they've come to meetings. And I guess there's something about the familiarity and the home of PACFA Tas, which has been really held in high regard and valued over years. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm actually really interested.
Very positive.
I'm really interested because I'm aware that many of the branches, they shop different venues, they try different things out, they never quite feel at home, and to have a place where there's that consistent regularity, the quality of service and feeling welcome. It's a yacht club. I haven't been there, but I assume it's picturesque.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
and it's well run. So it's probably
and
good.
Also, we've stuck to the formula of a particular night of the week. It always used to be Tuesday, but then it changed to always being Wednesday. But over 20 years, I mean, people are well tuned into what the day is in the current year type thing. And it's always 5:30 to 7, and people can then stay on and have a meal at the yacht club of their own volition, and pay for their meal or pay for some social time, have a drink or something with colleagues. So there's also that possibility without us having to move anywhere else or do anything differently. So that conviviality has also been a positive. And I suppose in terms of relationship with the venue, they're really happy for us to stay on and buy a meal, of course. So it's kind of a win-win. Yeah. There's parking, all of that sort of stuff, free parking, all of those kind of things that just make it really easy. Audio visual equipment's all there. It's just easy for the branch, the old branch and then PACFA Tas currently, to just organise it. Yeah, in fact, I still organise it. It's so easy that I still do it. Yeah. All these years.
Really, really important, because it's such a characteristic of psychotherapy and counselling that we're isolated as professionals. We work in a room by ourselves with clients, and in private practice, it's quite possible for a therapist to not have any other colleagues in their life, and to be able to create a space where colleagues can come together who do similar work and have like-minded views on the world and their professional life. I think it's really critical. So I think it's super important that you've been able to create a base, and through the base you create a community.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And budget-wise, it's very low cost. And just as we're talking, I'm thinking, in the 2000s and in the 2010s, the PD in Tasmania has always been very robust. And I can remember organising one-day workshops, two-day workshops. I think to myself now, wherever did I have the time to actually focus on that? And people would turn up in droves. The workshops would always be really successful. And to this day, once a month, we have an hour and a half of PD, and very well attended. Yeah, good vibe. And professional counselling, PCA, has morphed into PACFA Tas with the PACFA restructure during my presidency, PACFA presidency years, which I'll talk about in a while. And it just really works in Tasmania, as it does in a lot of places right across the country, mind you, for different PACFA branches, colleges running PDs. Yeah, I'm just joyful to be in Tasmania and talking about the history of the Tasmanian chunk of my knowledge of PACFA. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that the branch model you feel does work really well, or can, in terms of developing locally available professional development at low cost for psychotherapy counsellors.
Yes, absolutely. And the networking aspect is really critical. You've highlighted that. We do work in isolation, and the networking thing is just really valuable. A lot of people that I work with, if I'm supervising people, I'll encourage them to join in, even as a non-member, to come along to meetings, and that's just gold. Really, it is. Yeah.
Thanks, Di. So what I'll get you to talk about is you were talking about how you began to get involved with the PACFA as a central organisation, and at the same time you were still president of PACFA Tas, because it was still a member association. And then there was you've sort of touched upon the restructure that was a big part of your presidency. Can you perhaps talk us through your connection to PACFA and the different roles that you played at PACFA, and lead us, take us into the point where you did nominate and become elected as president?
Yeah. Gosh, it's nice to talk about this, to reflect. I continued after the heady days of going over as a council delegate for the first time and being a bit, I guess, overwhelmed, but excited. Overwhelmed and excited. I stayed interested and did come back to Tasmania and reported on that event and maintained my PACFA delegate role. So a couple of times a year, council and AGM, I'd go over on behalf of the branch and contribute. And I joined the ethics committee. That was my first national committee with PACFA, and so I was ethics committee and delegate, and then from there I was asked I thought it'd be a good idea to get more involved, and I joined the board back in 2011, as a board member responsible for member associations. There was such a position then, and it was a bit unscripted. I mean, that was the kind of the notion of the title of that role, but the unscriptedness meant that when I joined the board, it meant that I could liaise with member associations across the country in whatever shape or form I determined to do so. So I remember linking up with people like emails, or seeing them at council meetings or AGM, and creating little groups, just as you kind of go about when you step your toe in the water, not really having a direct guide, but seeing what's going to work. But what was also really good was part of that role became running the PACFA conference for 2012, convening the PACFA conference for that year. And that required me to work nationally in the sense of connecting and getting to know people. So in terms of my history with PACFA, that first job, which I almost crafted myself anyway, was pivotal in getting to know the members, particularly the leadership groups, or the executive groups as they were called initially, and just connecting with a wide range of people right across the country through newsletters or emails, or just connecting in the best way that I could. And then, of course, the conference was a marvellous experience, big, and we had that in Melbourne that year. Counselling and psychotherapy, what have we learned? That was essentially the theme. Wonderful time. I remember being really nervous, standing up as almost my first gig in front of 300 or 400 people at which was a good turn up for that one, welcoming and doing all the things, and being joined by the wonderful Aboriginal person who did a welcome to country, and just been joyed to have kind of feeling like I sort of made a contribution by literally standing in front of a bunch of people there for a conference. Yeah. So my journey with the board was...
Well, actually, before you jump into that journey,
Yeah.
Given that you've foreshadowed the restructure that was to come, maybe talk a bit more about the structure as it was at the time when you did first perhaps join the board and become more aware of the larger structure. I know that people are often unaware of the complexity that makes up PACFA and how that complexity has changed in structure over time. So what's... And
in fact, over time,
what was it?
Much more tailored and much more focused. So back in the day of, let's say 2010, there was president, vice president, secretary, treasurer on the board. There were ethics chair. There might have been even like a register chair. I can't remember the exact titles now. There were kind of people on the board representing the functions of PACFA as opposed to, let's say, counselling and psychotherapy. And it's interesting because at the time I was new and I was just embracing what was. And in retrospect, and hindsight's always a marvellous thing, it must have been pretty clunky because there was a CEO and we had a bit of movement in CEOs prior to 2010, prior to Maria Brett coming for her long stint as CEO.
Remember who was the CEO prior to Maria Brett?
Colin Benjamin was the gentleman prior to Maria, and he was an interesting character, which is a great kind of catch-all phrase. He was a character, and made an interesting contribution. And that
was there much of a team, much of a staff?
No, very, very small. That's what I was coming to. It was almost felt like there was a CEO and some admin staff, but nothing sort of, focused, or the beautiful position titles and structure that we have to this day, and just how hugely PACFA's moved even in the last decade when I think of it like that. Membership numbers and staffing wise.
And in terms of, because PACFA is now made up of a number of committees and branches and interest groups, colleges. What do you recall?
There were committees that, and the different committees were represented by a person, the chair of that committee being on the board. So as I say, ethics. I think Register got, or the EPAC, Register got caught up in something else, maybe training standards. So that was the language.
And Maria Brett came on as CEO.
Came on as EO, actually, executive officer. So come to think of it, the previous people were executive officers. We developed the role of a CEO, which Maria went into maybe 2 or 3 years into the time that she was at PACFA. And I can remember just a bit of upheaval, which is interesting to think about it in context of history, of this sort of background noise of a tangle of this conversation, continuing conversation of counselling, psychotherapy, counsellors. It was versus psychotherapists versus counsellors. So there was always robust discussions, not just at board, but certainly in council meeting. And there were people that had, by that stage, like Charles Wilson, Ione Lewis, Tim Johnson Newell, who'd been members of the board of PACFA for such a long time, and maybe in retrospect, something about the exhaustion of volunteering, you know, and volunteering maybe not being acknowledged as a job. Or what I mean by that is that people just give up so much of their time for their passion to PACFA. So just historically, just the noise and the rumblings of trying to sort things out and make ways forward so that people were happy and not, maybe not happy, but like on the same page and moving forward with positivity in a united organisation is what I'm thinking. Yeah, so there's all that kind of wrangling and talking, yeah. And then
do you recall the presidents, the people who were chairing the board while you were on the board?
Yes, there was Ione, Lewis, and then Charles Wilson. So I only was president for 4 years, and Charles was president for 2 years. And then in my 12 years on the board, I was then president for the last 6. Yeah. So I kind of did what I smile and think of as a bit of training. So after the board member responsible for member associations, I had to go secretary for a couple of years. And then I became vice president for a couple of years. And then I became president for 6 years. Yeah, which turned out to be 6 years, I should say. Yeah. So I had a turn at growing up on the board with those roles. I stayed on the ethics committee for years, and that was very rich, very positive. I worked with Simone Falvey-Bear for the last few years that I was on the ethics committee. Elizabeth Riley prior to Simone. Yeah, really great women and great chairs, great ethics people. Yeah.
And all people who have made not just a big contribution to PACFA, but a big contribution to the professions of counselling and psychotherapy here in Australia.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm thinking Alison Strasser was on the board for years, and her contribution to training standards, exceptional, wonderful. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to share in relation to the years of while you were secretary, vice president? Any notable events or
when I was
would like to touch upon?
in around the vice president time, I took responsibility for the PACFA restructure, which was absolutely huge and really ultimately successful and great for the organisation, which was moving from those member-based associations, like lots of small groups of people doing lots of work for PACFA, and it being flipped around so that the PACFA organisation itself was becoming more financially robust, able to employ more people to do a lot of the work of the member associations, but drawing it together so that we develop the structure which we now know with the colleges and with the branches, and with the committees and with the board. So a lot of renaming, which meant rejigging the whole organisation, of course. I mean, I can speak it out really comfortably and it kind of rolls off the tongue, but not disenfranchising members and keeping everybody moving along, working together was part and parcel. We had committees here and committees there and hours and days and weeks of workshopping different ideas until we didn't just suddenly come up with this model that we now have. We workshopped lots of ways that the organisation might look, and we've got what we've got today, which is a robust organisation in the structure that we've got it.
How would you describe the final rationale that emerged out of those deliberations for the structure that emerged?
So the rationale was around holistic, the psychoanalytic people had well left by then, so we're really only talking counselling and psychotherapy membership. So it was about holistic and bringing everybody along together so that members were equal partners, regardless of what they called themselves, counsellor or psychotherapist. But also it was to streamline the organisation so that the work was more centralised, and the people in the branches, in the colleges, technically had less that's not quite right. I was going to say less responsible work, because people in colleges and branches have very responsible work to do at the current time. But it streamlined the money, because each of those smaller groups had a treasurer and had money that they held and were responsible to report to the head office, so to speak. But it actually streamlined all the money. So it was just a sensible move, really.
It was a big centralising.
Yes.
Where it brought shared, disparate functions together as shared functions,
and so in terms of any government relations and lobbying and politics, it made us more robust and available to talk to government, because we were centralised. So we could make claim to the thousands of members which we had.
And so that was a move. Part of that was a move from member associations to branches, the College of to colleges and branches, the College of Psychotherapy, College of Counselling, and then a branch in each state and territory that wanted to have a branch. And so was that then that shift from people being members of member associations and those member associations being members of PACFA to individual membership of PACFA. And obviously allowing a changeover period where you could be either a member of a member association or you could become an individual member of PACFA.
Nigel, that's absolute. It's really good to chat about this. That was an absolute key part, of course, yes. So people became individual members of PACFA, and some member organisations stayed active. So we didn't say you have to break up, you have to do this. We offered choice. Majority of people across the country from member associations came on board as individual members. It was the consultation, and part of the work was consulting with members, and the restructure took a long time, and it was important to maintain momentum on it, and consultation and bringing along everyone together, which I believe we achieved. It was very well, if not unanimously, supported. And
I'll ask how you did that, because then, as is now, there was a council structure, council body within PACFA, and then we've still got a council body within PACFA. And was that the core? Was that sort of the central deliberating format? That consultation work?
There was a working party, and we consulted with council. Yes. We were also transparent all the way through, and a lot of documentation went out to members, a lot of sharing of where we were at. So we didn't just, maybe we did have just the 2 meetings, as in council meetings per year, but there was a lot of other opportunities to share and talk that were taken up. So council members, for example, weren't just suddenly, here's this new idea and surprised. People saw it coming in terms of the information being shared out. Good processing, good processes.
And Council for Clarity was essentially 2 delegates from each member association. There were many. Do you recall how many member associations there were?
When I first joined, so way back in the early 2000s, there would have been 40 plus, and with some of them falling away, choosing to leave the psychoanalytics, for example. Maybe we were like 34 groups. Yeah.
So still
yeah.
a decent sized group of people to come together and
Yes.
and discuss and share ideas, and not an easy size to manage in terms of a consultation and conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I also want to ask about because that restructure required a fairly major change to the constitution. Do you recall how that process was managed? Because it's not a cheap or easy thing to do to restructure a constitution. We're considering it at the moment, and we're being quoted large sums of money to go through the process and restructure a constitution. So that can't have been easy.
Our constitution expert, right through my time with PACFA, was Charles Wilson, dear Charles, who died, sadly died early this year. Charles did masses of work on the Constitution, also with Maria Brett and a small team of people, but essentially they pulled that off together. Quite a remarkable feat, and presented it to council.
And talks to the need that PACFA has always had to run on a shoestring budget and to rely on a lot of work being done by volunteers to be able to make things happen. I think that's an important message for people who are listening to this, to realise that actually the volunteers have to do a lot of work to be even enable our association to do what it does.
Yes.
So do you want to start talking then about your years as president of PACFA and what your experience was over that time? That was 2016 to 2022.
Yes. I can remember how delighted, excited, pleased, joyed I was when I was elected president in 2016. And I took over the reins from Charles Wilson. Charles had been, as I mentioned earlier in this talk, in this sharing, the president for 2 years prior to me. And wow, whole kind of new board, a whole kind of board to lead, to look out for, to run the organisation along with the CEO. By that stage, Maria Brett had been installed as CEO, which was very positive for PACFA from the point of view of the look of PACFA, the feel of PACFA. To actually have a CEO looked good on government documents and in talks with government. One of the things that is a highlight of my time as president is the amount of lobbying on behalf of counsellors and psychotherapists, on behalf of our members, that I was able to do over years, and the involvement and the reception I got from Parliament, from members of Parliament right across the country on behalf of PACFA, and the willingness that I found doors opened for me to represent the organisation and to talk about the importance of recognition for counsellors and psychotherapists.
How would you describe that reception?
Really positive, really interested. My approach to lobbying has always been relational, and I've always been available to share where PACFA's been at, share the great credit of our membership in context of registration requirements, in terms of qualifications, in terms of lived experience of the profession, to highlight the enormous contribution of counsellors and psychotherapists to Australia, to our country. So coming from that, rather than saying, like banging my hand on the desk saying, how come you haven't noticed us so far, and why don't you do this, and why don't you give us that, to actually educate Parliament, educate members of parliament, educate influential people in government, bureaucrats, advisors, people that will talk to other people about, oh, you heard what these counsellors are doing? You heard what these psychotherapists are doing? That's been my approach, and that was welcomed. And as maybe there was something about a reasonable approach and a positive approach and an articulate approach and a consistent approach, and being available to talk to people lots on different media really put PACFA in a very positive light. And I feel really proud of that. And people still contact me, a year out of the job, Nigel, I'm still being contacted. I pass people on to you and to Johanna and to other staff and whatnot now, of course. But there's still a lot of things, like if people just want a brief chat, I'm up to date enough to still share how marvellous our profession are. And of course, Medicare was part of that, Medicare equaling recognition. And one day, maybe not too far down the track, counsellors and psychotherapists will be eligible for that. I'm really confident of that. So that was a vision and a purpose and a mission. And we made a lot of ground. There's still a lot of ground to go, of course, but that was something that I really enjoyed doing as well. I really enjoyed it. And it added my PACFA work, which when I finished being president, I had no idea how much time it actually did take, all of this president work. And I'd do it all again because it added value to the work that I'm able to do with my clients, because it kind of provided a bit of a balance in the sense of my belief in our profession, my work in our profession, and then my work for our profession. So it had a nice kind of vibe going for it, that aspect of it.
It's a very different job to being a counsellor.
Oh yeah.
Being a board member, or being a volunteer, or being a president of a national professional association. And you sort of touched on having a new board.
Yes.
So can I get you to talk about the people and the personalities that were on the board with you when you first started, and maybe talk about some of those people and the key achievements that you witnessed along the way that maybe they achieved or that you achieved together during those 6 years.
Yeah. I've mentioned Simone Falvibert. She was the board member for ethics. She was the ethics chair, and Simone was on the board when I was on the board as president, as well as maybe before that. I might be getting the date because I was on the board for such a long time. Simone's contribution to ethics documents was phenomenal, and that in and of itself is a huge achievement. Attention to detail, getting things right, doing things good, doing good work. That's my really strong memory of the way Simone worked with the support of her committee. And it's interesting because as we're talking, I love my time on the PACFA board, and I really felt privileged to be president, especially for 6 years. And I absolutely wasn't doing it alone. I was supported by board members, and I supported board members. And there was an ebb and flow, people on the board when I started as president, people moving through, finishing their terms. It was a real team effort. It was a real joint, sort of positive, purposeful, meaningful, for the greater good of the counselling and psychotherapy. That was my my feel in at the time, but also in retrospect. Charles was immediate past president. He was incredibly supportive and wise, and would just be really helpful, and it's a pity we can't talk to him about PACFA history, because he'd have a whole great story to tell as well, because Charles himself had been there since the very beginning in the late 90s, that kind of long time. And one of the total highlights was welcoming CATSIP as a college I'm running a couple of stories here at the same time, Nigel. I'm conscious of that. The College of CATSIP, College of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Healing Practices, that developed and was born when I was president, and we had Carly Atkinson come on the board as the first CATSIP board member, CATSIP convener, and that was really very, very exciting. Yeah. And I guess with each board members, because it's like volunteer, people are passionate about the things they do and the roles they take on. So Charles continued on as immediate past president. Maybe he took a small break in the 6 years that I was there as president. He took on EPAC convener. He just kept contributing.
EPAC?
Amazing.
EPAC?
Yeah.
What's EPAC?
Oh, Education Program Accreditation Committee. Yeah, beautiful.
And Charles had just taken that on.
Yes, yeah. And actually, lovely Paul was in that role for many years, and he made an absolutely solid contribution. Yeah, lovely Paul from Queensland. Pat Bradley joined the board at the same time as me, and so did George Gintelis. I recruited Pat as the counselling representative, and I recruited George as treasurer. And to my absolute surprise, George Gintelis had been an accountant in a past life. So that was just inspired. And George and Pat stayed working with me on the board for 6 years in their roles. And George did an amazing, fabulous job as treasurer. And he used to delight us at council meetings with beautiful graphs and beautiful charts. And very fortunately, PACFA's finances have always, well, pretty much been on the up and up and up and up. So George just really kept the ship really strong. And, I note Belinda Gomez is our accountant. Belinda retired in the year just gone. And she and George worked fantastically together. That was just really awesome. And Pat Bradley just did so much. She created the College of Counselling and did an enormous amount of work with the counselling members in PACFA, and a lot of PD and a lot of contribution around conferences. And she was also a convener of the PACFA South Australia. So she just did masses of work, gladly, happily, huge contribution to PACFA. Gorgeous woman, Pat. Really great to have her on the board. Very level-headed, Pat. She would sit and listen and then have something really sensible and helpful to say. Really, great contributor. Yeah. And I remember when Kate Briggs joined, and I was maybe in my second term as president. I can't remember the exact year. It was really good to have Kate on board because she was really passionate about training standards and really articulate about, where PACFA, looking at and researching around where PACFA was at and where it would be really useful to go in terms of training standards. And over the years, there was Tony, who was vice president at one stage, Tony Clarkson. Tony stayed for a short time and a good time, and had his own excellent contribution for the time that he was there. People made themselves known on the board because there was opportunity for everybody to talk and everybody to contribute. And people did. Doug Aberley's been on the board for ages, and certainly during the time that I was president. Doug took over ethics and then took over, your vice president. Yeah. Yeah,
he's now my vice president.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. And Doug also has interests over and above his great psychotherapy work and has been on lots of boards. So his knowledge and contribution and help and support were always very useful, not just in the ethics arena, but more broadly. Yeah.
And to one of the stories that I heard was that CATSIP came on board after a conference where Kate Briggs was the convener. A real Indigenous focus at that conference. That discussion was held, and then the idea was born, and the invitation was made to set up a college of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander healing practitioners.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I mean, it's such a gift, because we used to have the conferences every couple of years, and it was such a gift to welcome people to whatever conference it was, and to witness the excellent and hard work of conference committees to actually get to the starting blocks. And that conference in Sydney, very, very powerful, from which was born CATSIP. Yeah, you're right. I'm just reflecting on that. Really, really good stuff. Yeah.
Also, during, I think, your final term as president, there was a change of CEO. There was a change of leadership in the organisation. What can you say about that change of late leadership? What inspired it? What was there a rationale behind that? There's some thinking around. Was it intentional? Was there some thinking around what it was that PACFA needed going forwards?
Yeah. In the last couple of years of my presidency, you're absolutely right. We changed CEOs, which was a major and historically very important. Maria Brett had been with PACFA for 10 years, and PACFA kind of grew up with Maria. In fact, Maria took PACFA through the restructure as well, from the CEO perspective and the organisational perspective. And that was really great. She did a great job of getting to know members over years and putting in place like the restructure, but many, many other things as well. Over that time, we also developed RCAP, which was the Australian Register of Counsellors and Psychotherapists, our work with the ACA, and contributing as a director in that company was also a positive thing on behalf of PACFA that is part of my history of PACFA. I think a summary might be that the board were looking to be focusing more on strategy and less on organisational development or organisational matters per se. And maybe it was around a change in the time that maybe a new CEO, somebody fresh, might be able to take on more of the organisational matters and leave the board to strategy. So I think that was the predisposition to looking at changing our CEO. And Maria had been there for a particularly long time, I guess, for a CEO in a small organisation. So maybe it was something about, perfect timing, in the sense of the board wanting to clarify where they were heading regards vision, and Maria being there, having had been there for quite some time. So I guess that's a bit of a summary around the change. But it was a very big change, because Maria had been there a while, and we welcomed Johanna, which was also a terrific recruit for PACFA. And Johanna's been with us, 2 years?
3 years now, I think.
Yeah,
And I recall the recruitment process, and you asked me to be part of the group with Doug Aberlay and Tony Clarkson.
That's exactly right.
To be part of the interview process, and it was clear that we were looking for someone that had experience with professional associations, somebody that had a strategic perspective, had a political savvy, understood how the politics of professions worked at all levels of government in Australia, and also somebody who had very strong skills in communication, which was really important, because PACFA had found itself in a very competitive environment where we weren't the only professional association. We weren't the only option counsellors and psychotherapists in Australia, and that was a space where we needed to actually step into and probably become more competitive in that space, and that was a big part of the recruitment process as we sought a new CEO, a big strategic step.
And that summary regards the brief for you and Doug and Tony is a really nice summary of the person we were looking for. Yes, that's nice, Nigel. I'm really pleased that you shared that. That's beautiful. Yeah. Okay. Australian Register of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. So this was part and parcel of the government regards lobbying, wanting to know who were the counsellors and psychotherapists in the country. We can only deal, government says, we can only deal with one list. We need a list. And so we liaised with the ACA liaised with us, and we got this register. And it's pretty much been helpful in terms of numbers of people and a place that we can point to as the list of registered counsellors and psychotherapists right across the country from both organisations. It's just pretty much sat there as that list. It's been helpful, it's been useful. It's been frustrating in terms of our conversations with ACA around different levels and different ways of putting together our different lists to merge. That sounds a bit complicated, but it served its purpose.
Well, yes, and part of that challenge is that we've got two large professional associations, and there's other smaller ones around the place in Australia, and they've got different ways of classifying and categorising and setting standards for psychotherapists and counsellors. So trying to get a common standard was part of the aspiration, but still remains a challenge for the profession in Australia.
Yes, part of the aspiration, absolutely. But the challenge from the two organisations having different rules and regs around standards has left the register intact and user-friendly, fit for purpose, but also challenging in terms of conversations with the other organisation.
And are there any other high points or achievements or people that you would like to, or events that occurred during your presidency that you'd like to sort of reference or mention? Towards the end there, you had COVID was one that I think was significant, but are there any others that you'd like to talk about that period? It's
interesting because COVID seems in an odd way a bit of a long time ago, but gosh, that really threw us from meeting as a board. It actually changed the way the board meets. Meeting as a board face-to-face once every 6 to 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks, whatever the lay of the calendar, to going board meetings online. So that was a real change. And of course, financially, we were really quick to jump on board with the various contributions from the government to small businesses and so on and so forth. So it was incredibly nerve-wracking, incredibly hectic, but we did well from that, and we were able to, there's a word I'm after, we were able to go with the flow is not quite the right word. We're able to reset, we're able to re-engineer all of the work onto online. And I give credit to the board members and the staff members and the organisation of PACFA for being able to become enabled with that new way over those 2 or 3 years. That was quite something. So in retrospect, it almost feels like it was quite smooth, but I can remember at the time it didn't feel like it was smooth. It was like not knowing and holding the space.
Yes, the lockdowns that came with a worldwide declaration of a virulent virus meant that everything went online. We changed our training standards. The training went online. That was temporary. We're now considering making that a permanent possibility, which goes against the grain of a lot of long-standing psychotherapists and counsellors who really believe in the necessity of both face-to-face practice and face-to-face training, and all of our meetings have gone online, and a lot of the therapy itself that people are practicing has also gone online.
Yeah. There are a few other things, Nigel, I'd like to mention. You came on as secretary, which was really great, and here you are now as president, not too many years later, which is really great for the organisation and really exciting to, I mean, I guess part of the constitution is that you have to be on the board a couple of years prior to nominating for president, but it gave you a real chance to work with me, in fact, to see what was possible in terms of your future on the PACFA board. So that's really exciting. I feel pleased and proud that you've gone on to be the president. I think that's really great. And, you know, I take a bit of like a smile around that being on my watch that you joined.
That's okay. You can take credit.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that I'm left with is the incredible generosity of PACFA board members, the incredible generosity of volunteers for PACFA, and the willingness to work things out and nut things through, to actually listen to the hard arguments and argue and ponder and wonder and come together. I can remember over years of PACFA on the PACFA board, we'd start off at the beginning of a 2-day meeting, and it could feel like, how are we going to get through this agenda, for starters? Or, oh, this is a bit of a tricky topic, you know, those people sitting over there are going to have this idea, and that's going to be a different idea to those people sitting over there. Just normal human interaction. How are we going to get through this? And, you know, we'd have lunch together, we'd have morning, afternoon tea breaks, we'd chat about the things that were hotter and heavier around the table in that other coffee space. And somehow we would make progress and we would move it onwards and upwards. And that stays with me in terms of, I've said generosity, but it's also in the realm of loving kindness, to actually work broadly with people and purposefully and get on with things for the greater good for our members. So those kind of things stay with me in a sense. And just ringing up people and having people answer the phone and getting back on emails, or people saying, yes, come and talk here, or we'd like you to do this, or that's really great, I heard the CEO talk about this. I've heard that person, just that kind of chit chat about counsellors and psychotherapists and PACFA. That really was a very heartwarming thing for me, and the support that I had right through my time on the board, that stays with me.
Yeah, the impact that we make in the lives of therapists, counsellors, and psychotherapists, and then of course the way we're able to support them to make an impact in the lives of the people that they work with in the community, and hearing back how our work has made that easier or more effective, or enabled access to different populations that people are working with, or enabled counsellors and psychotherapists to access sources of funding that they hadn't been able to access in the past. Big thing that's occurred, I think, is the private health insurers that have really come on board, and now for the most part, all the large private health insurers are very happy to support work done.
Yes, you're right. That's been a big thing over the last few years, particularly. Yeah, makes our work a little more accessible.
And talks to our growing credibility.
Yes.
And talks to that need for a national professional association that's able to advocate on behalf of these professions in a way that's unified and collective and all inclusive.
Yes.
And you've certainly led the way in modelling how to listen and incorporate and allow all points of view while also needing ultimately to be the person responsible for making hard decisions that not everybody will necessarily be happy with. And so I'm very appreciative of your leadership. I think that PACFA has been very, very lucky, very blessed to have you volunteering with the organisation for such a long time and providing leadership for such a long time over critical years, including the COVID lockdown years, and to have led us through such significant periods of change, like the restructure, like moving from one CEO to the next, getting us through difficult times, and always coming out smiling, shining, listening, and being available to be kind to everybody that you come into contact with. And so it's not surprising to me that you have built such great relationships throughout the profession, within PACFA, and also through your advocacy work as well. So, Di Stow, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nigel. It's been really nice chatting with you.